Okay, so my name is Christina Davis, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about gun control in the United States. So, all throughout the U.S., we have 50 different states, and each state pretty much has their own different laws and legislation behind gun control. And tonight I'm going to be talking to you about how some of the states have negative effects on gun control, or on the U.S. So that's my major claim, is that the easy availability of guns to citizens in particular states rather than strict gun control negatively affects the United States as a nation. So I'm going to be sharing that with you guys and supporting that major claim with three different secondary claims. My first secondary claim is that the lack of gun control allows weapons to fall into the wrong hands. Second one is the lack of gun control promotes violence, and the third one is that the lack of gun control causes fear to the citizens. So going to my first claim, my first secondary claim, weapons fall into the wrong hands. So the way that I have two different ways that weapons fall into the wrong hands, two different people that I could go into. And the first one that weapons fall into their hands and it's wrong is potential criminals. So I have an example, and it's from in Arizona, a shooting that happened in Arizona. So I got this quote from NPR.org, and it said that there's little obstacle to get weapons in Arizona, and the 22-year-old basically shot 6 people, and there wasn't really any obstacle for him to carry a concealed weapon, because in Arizona, if you're basically above the age of 21, you can carry a concealed weapon. So that kind of has a negative effect because it allows people that are potentially harmful to obtain guns. And then the second group of people that it could fall into their hands, and it would be a really bad idea, is if children get a hold of the guns. So that's children of gun owners can potentially get a hold of them. So from a study in, in the BaltimoreSun.com, there was an article that said a 15-year-old named Michael Brooks was shot in 2011 by one of his friends, and his friend got the gun from his father's room, and it was supposed to be safe and stuff, but it didn't end up being safe, so he ended up killing his friend, and that was a tragic loss. So a statistic behind that is that 2 out of 5 U.S. households with children between the ages of 3 and 17 keep at least one gun in the house, and of those guns, half of them are unlocked and loaded. So this is negative because if children get a hold of the guns, accidents can happen and people can get hurt. My second secondary claim is that the lack of gun control promotes violence. And the first way is that children are exposed to crimes with guns. And I read an article from the SBCoalition.org, and it had a statistic that 3,042 children and teens died of gunfire in America in 2007, and more than half of the firearm deaths involving children and teens and involving firearms were in the following 10 states. So out of California, there were 431. Out of Texas, there were 250. Out of Florida, there were 176. Out of Illinois, there were 150. Out of Pennsylvania, there were 126. Michigan, there were 119. Georgia, there were 114. And in Louisiana, there were also 114. New York had 107, and Ohio had 104. So as you guys can see, this is a problem, obviously, because children are getting a hold of these guns, and they are being killed by these guns. So the lack of control lets them have access to guns and be hurt by them. And then the second way that it promotes violence is that women are often victims in cases of domestic violence involving guns. So that means that men that own guns end up hurting the women in their lives, their spouses, their girlfriends. So from a woman named Wendy Kukier. She said that firearms are one of the principal ways in which women in this country are killed by their intimate partners. So, and then an example of that is in September 22nd, 2010, a woman was shot by her husband in front of her son, and he had a previous offense against his wife. So that was in South Carolina, and they were unable to get the guns from him. So since they were unable to get the guns, he was allowed to harm her. And then the lack of gun control causes fear to citizens is my third claim. And Americans are afraid of criminals, so they buy guns. That's the main reason. And Greg Wolf, owner of Glockmeister shops in Arizona, he experienced an increase of sales after the shooting. That was in my first secondary claim. So yeah, as a result of that, people were going out and buying more guns to protect themselves. So, and then the second way that they fear is they fear that their children may not grow up in safe neighborhoods. So there was a shooting at Cape Fear High School, and parents were really upset with how the schools reacted to the gun violence, and they didn't let their kids really go back to school. And then a girl almost died as a result. So all of these three secondary claims, the lack of gun control allows weapons to fall into the wrong hands, it promotes violence, and it causes fear to citizens. Those support my main claim that the easy availability of guns to citizens in particular states negatively affects the United States as a nation.
All right, the phrasing of the proposition is awkward. It's got a dependent clause on it, so you want to be careful about that. You did lay out the secondary claims pretty clearly. Sometimes the secondary claims, though, are also phrased a little bit in a little bit convoluted way. The basic problem I have with most of your evidence, you're very dependent on example evidence, but we're often getting a paraphrase or a summary of what the evidence, what the argument said. We're not getting direct quotes on this, and I think that that's a little bit problematic. The one or two places that we got direct quotes, there was sometimes an incomplete piece of information. For instance, you started listing all those states and the individual numbers of gun deaths that there were, and I got no information that talked about what the gun laws were in those states, that they fit into the category where people had easy access. So I thought that was a little bit problematic. All right, I got to cut this short because we do